Hey everyone, I've noticed that many of you are enjoying the videos, but most of you haven't subscribed yet. We're super close to hitting 1,000 subscribers, and your support could help us reach that milestone. If you're enjoying the content, please hit that subscribe button and give this video a like. It really makes a huge difference and helps us keep creating more awesome content. Thank you so much for watching and supporting. The day started like any other. I rolled out of bed at 6:30 a.m., out of habit more than necessity. Jessica was still asleep, sprawled across her side of the bed, her arm draped across the sheets like she owned the space. In a way, she did. She always did. The woman could command a room with a look, manipulate a conversation with a smile, and convince you of anything with those damn eyes. Today, though, something about her felt different. Breakfast was quiet. Jessica sat across from me, sipping her black coffee, scrolling through her phone with that indifferent, distant expression she'd adopted over the past few months. I couldn't remember the last time she'd looked up from her screen while we ate. It didn't bother me at first. People drift, life gets busy, but now it was more than that. Her phone was practically glued to her hand, her laugh a little too fake, and her time spent away from me was beginning to stack up. She had always been social, but lately she was more absent than present. Always with friends, always busy. There was a missed call on her phone that morning. I noticed it while I was pouring myself a second cup of coffee. She glanced at the screen, tilted it face down without saying a word. That wasn't like her. Not at all. My stomach tightened. I didn't ask. Something about the way she moved made me think twice. A small part of me, a foolish part, didn't want to know the answer. After breakfast, I went for my usual morning run, trying to shake off the feeling that had settled like a weight on my chest. The fresh air helped a little, but my mind wouldn't stop turning over what I'd seen, that split-second look on her face like she was hiding something. Maybe it was just me, reading into things. Maybe it was just the monotony of marriage. 10 years of being together could dull the edges of even the sharpest connection, right? But deep down, I knew better. Later that morning, I was in my office, pretending to work, but really my focus was shot. My thoughts kept circling back to Jessica. Was it just my imagination? Was I paranoid? I glanced at the door, half expecting her to walk in, her usual radiant smile plastered on her face, asking about lunch plans or if we should go to dinner with friends later. But that hadn't happened in a while either, not the way it used to. When Jessica returned from the gym that afternoon, I noticed something. A glance exchanged with one of the trainers, a man maybe 5 years younger than me, athletic, cocky. It was too quick, too subtle, but I saw it. That smile, the one she used to give me, was now directed at him. I felt a flicker of anger, but more than that, I felt something worse, doubt. Was I seeing things that weren't there, or was this the crack in the facade I'd been ignoring? It was just a glance, I told myself, but it festered. My mind raced, replaying little moments from the past few weeks. The nights out, the secretive texts, the dismissive way she'd shrug off my questions about where she'd been. Each small event, insignificant by itself, now felt like part of a bigger picture. An ugly one. That evening, she went out again. Just drinks with the girls, she said. I asked if I could join her, but she shook her head. It's just a girls' night, Matt, nothing personal. I smiled, told her to have fun, but my gut twisted as I watched her walk out the door, dressed just a bit too nice for a casual night with friends. I didn't move for a long time after she left. Just sat there in the quiet, feeling the stillness of the house creep in. The tension I had been brushing aside was now pounding at my skull, filling every corner of the room with doubt. I wasn't imagining this. I couldn't be. Something had changed between us, and I was too blind to see it coming. The next few days were a blur of small moments. Jessica's laughter on the phone, reserved for someone else. Her texts were suddenly private, her phone always locked and out of sight. She had grown colder, more distant. Conversations between us felt hollow, like she was talking out of obligation, going through the motions. The Jessica I knew, the woman I married, had started fading months ago, but I had been too distracted to see it. On Wednesday, she canceled dinner plans, again. Third time in a row. No reason. Just a casual something came up thrown over her shoulder as she disappeared out the door. She didn't even offer an excuse this time, didn't bother to pretend like she cared. That night, I stared at my reflection in the dark kitchen window, the half-empty wine glass in front of me untouched. The tension had now twisted into a hard knot in my gut. By Thursday morning, I couldn't ignore the signs anymore. Jessica had never been good at hiding things. She wasn't built for it. The more I watched, the clearer it became. A flurry of text notifications would light up her phone, and her fingers would move too fast as she replied, her smile too sly as she leaned back, glancing at me to make sure I wasn't paying attention. Her phone was always face down now. I stopped asking where she was going or why she was late. Every lie made my skin crawl, but I wasn't ready to confront her. Not yet. Confrontation was too easy, too impulsive. No, I needed to be sure. I needed proof. And when I had it, I'd make sure both Jessica and her lover felt every ounce of pain she was inflicting on me. That evening, I decided to go out. I needed air, space, something. I found myself at a bar we used to frequent. It was quieter than usual, dimly lit, the kind of place you go to be alone, even in a crowd. I nursed a beer, staring into the foam, lost in thought, when my phone buzzed with a message. Jessica again. Don't wait up. I stared at the screen. The words, so casual, might as well have been a slap in the face. I wasn't waiting up. Not anymore. I was done playing the fool. By the time Sunday rolled around, I had reached my limit. Jessica was out of the house more than she was in it, always with vague explanations about where she'd been. And me? I was left here feeling like a ghost in my own home. Sunday evening, as she got ready for yet another girls' night, I tried one last time. Jess, we need to talk. She barely glanced up from the mirror. About what? I stared at her reflection, the woman I'd shared a life with for a decade, now a stranger. About us, you and me, where this is going. She sighed, setting down her brush. Matt, I don't have time for this right now. Right. She didn't have time. She never had time anymore. You're going out again? Her eyes flicked toward the clock. I told you, I'm meeting the girls. You don't need to wait up. Who are you really meeting? The question slipped out before I could stop myself. Jessica froze just for a second. Then she turned, a slow smile curling her lips. What is that supposed to mean? You know what it means. For the briefest moment, I thought I saw something. Guilt, maybe. But then it was gone, replaced by that practiced nonchalance. Matt, you're being ridiculous. She grabbed her purse, kissed me on the cheek like I was a child she was placating, and walked out. The door closed behind her with a soft click. The house was silent, empty, and cold. And I was done being a fool. The house was quieter than it had ever been. The ticking of the kitchen clock seemed louder, more insistent, as if it was marking every second I wasted. Jessica was gone again. Out, as usual, with no explanation beyond meeting the girls or just a quick drink. At this point, the lies barely stung. They were just noise in the background, words without substance. I didn't even react when she walked out the door anymore. Instead, I observed, quietly, patiently. I started keeping track of everything. Jessica's excuses, her late nights, her casual indifference. The more I watched, the more obvious it became. She wasn't even trying to hide it. Every time she looked at her phone, every time she smiled at a text, it felt like a slap in the face. My skin would crawl, my muscles tensing as I watched her fingers move quickly across the screen, sending messages I wasn't supposed to see. One night, while she was in the shower, I sat on the couch and stared at her phone sitting on the coffee table. Face down, as always. My heart raced in my chest. I could feel the urge rising, the need to know, to tear through that thin veil of pretense she kept up so well. But I held back. I'd done it before. Grabbed the phone when she wasn't looking, scrolled through her messages, but there was nothing. Nothing concrete, at least. She was careful. Too careful. Her phone was locked with a passcode, something she changed a few months back. That had been the first red flag. Couples don't keep secrets like that. We'd always had an open door policy when it came to our phones. Now she guarded it like a vault. That night, I asked her about her plans, trying to keep my tone casual. I didn't want to tip my hand, not yet. "So where are you going tomorrow?" I asked over dinner. She barely glanced up from her plate. "Just out with Marissa," she replied, her voice distant, automatic. "You've been spending a lot of time with her lately," I said, my words laced with a hint of skepticism. She looked up, finally meeting my eyes, but there was something cold there, detached. "Is that a problem?" "No," I lied. "Just curious." Her eyes lingered on mine for a moment longer, and I could feel the tension tightening between us. But then she shrugged, brushing it off like it didn't matter. "I'll be back late. Don't wait up. Don't wait up." I was sick of hearing those words. Sick of playing the part of the dutiful, trusting husband. But I wasn't going to confront her. Not yet. I needed more than just my suspicions. I needed the truth. The next morning, I went through the motions. Work, meetings, emails, all of it a blur as I tried to piece together the puzzle in my head. Jessica's behavior, the lies, the late nights, it all pointed to one thing, but I didn't have proof. And I couldn't accuse her without it. She'd just deny everything, twist it around, make me feel like I was the one losing my mind. That afternoon, I met up with a friend for drinks. John and I had been friends for years, ever since college. He was one of the few people I could talk to about anything. But today, I found myself hesitating. I didn't want to admit what was happening, didn't want to say it out loud. John was halfway through his beer when he glanced at me, concern etched on his face. "You okay, man? You've been quiet." I forced a smile. "Yeah, just a lot going on at work." He didn't buy it. John had always been good at reading people, especially me. "It's Jessica, isn't it?" I didn't say anything, just stared down at my drink. After a long pause, I finally nodded. "Yeah." He sighed, leaning back in his chair. "You want to talk about it?" Not really, but I did. I wanted to tell him everything. Unload the weight that had been crushing me for weeks, but I couldn't, not yet. Instead, I deflected. "Have you seen her lately?" John's face tightened, just for a second, before he covered it up with a shrug. "Not really, we've all been busy." It was a lie. I could see it in his eyes the way he avoided looking directly at me. He knew something, maybe more than I did, but he wasn't going to say it. Not unless I pushed. I didn't push. That night, Jessica came home late, as usual. I was already in bed, pretending to be asleep, when I heard her heels clicking softly on the hardwood floor. The faint scent of perfume and wine lingered as she slid into bed beside me, her back turned, the space between us feeling wider than ever. I stared at the ceiling, my mind racing. Tomorrow, I told myself. Tomorrow, I'll know for sure. The next evening, Jessica left the house again. Same excuse, same routine. Only this time, I didn't sit at home waiting. Instead, I grabbed my laptop and got to work. Years of working in IT had taught me more than enough about digital privacy. Jessica had no idea who she was married to, a man who could break into just about anything if he wanted to. And tonight, I wanted to. I installed spyware on her phone. It wasn't hard, a few clicks, some bypasses, and I was in. Now I'd have access to every message, every call, every location. It felt wrong, invasive, but I pushed those thoughts aside. Jessica had made me do this. I wasn't the one who'd broken our trust. I sat there in the dark, my hands trembling slightly as I waited for the app to sync with her phone. It took a few minutes, and each second felt like an eternity. My heart pounded in my chest, fear and anger swirling together in a toxic mix. But when the messages finally appeared on my screen, I wasn't prepared for what I saw. The first few texts were innocent enough, boring even, conversations with friends, family, work stuff. But then I scrolled further, and my stomach dropped. Brian. I hadn't heard that name in years, not since our wedding when Jessica had casually mentioned her high school sweetheart. I didn't think much of it back then, just a name, a piece of her past. But now, seeing his name in her phone, I felt like the ground had been ripped out from under me. The texts were explicit, intimate, detailed. They'd been meeting up for months, sneaking around behind my back while I played the fool. Jessica had been lying to me every single day, smiling in my face while she was out there with him. I felt sick. My hands trembled as I scrolled through the messages, each one a nail in the coffin of our marriage. I couldn't stop reading, even though every word felt like a punch to the gut. Brian, I can't wait to see you tonight. Jessica, me too. Matt thinks I'm with the girls again. He's so clueless. Clueless, that's what I was to her. A joke. A man she could laugh about with her lover while she paraded around like the perfect wife. I closed the laptop and sat there in the dark, my mind racing. The rage came slowly, building inside me like a storm, until I could barely breathe. This wasn't just infidelity. This was betrayal on a level I couldn't have imagined. She'd destroyed everything we had, and for what? For some high school flame she couldn't let go of. The anger burned through me, but beneath it, something colder took root. I wasn't going to confront her. Not yet. That would be too easy, too quick. I wanted her to suffer the way I had suffered. I wanted them both to feel the weight of what they'd done. I stood up, pacing the room, trying to think. My mind was spinning, but one thing was clear. I needed a plan, something that would make them regret every single moment they'd spent together behind my back. I wasn't going to be the victim anymore. The next few days passed in a blur. Jessica was oblivious, going about her life as if nothing had changed, while I quietly laid the groundwork for what was coming. I made small adjustments, transferred some money from our joint account into a separate one, kept a closer eye on her movements, tracked her texts with Brian. Every piece of information I gathered was a step towards something bigger. The old Matt, the one who would have confronted her in a fit of anger, was gone. In his place was someone colder, more calculating. I wasn't going to explode. I was going to unravel her life piece by piece until there was nothing left. And Brian? He wasn't going to walk away unscathed either. I spent my nights staring at the texts, reading and rereading them until every word was burned into my brain. Jessica's laughter, her mockery, her casual disregard for the man she'd married, it fueled the fire inside me. But I kept it contained. I couldn't afford to lose control. This wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about justice. About making sure Jessica and Brian felt every bit of pain they'd caused me. One night, as Jessica lay asleep beside me, I stared at her, the woman I thought I knew, and felt nothing but cold resolve. The life we had built together was already dead. Now it was just a matter of burying it. Tomorrow I would start. The first move in a game neither of them knew they were playing. And when it was over, I would be the one left standing. The next morning I woke up early, slipping out of bed before Jessica stirred. The house was quiet, the sun barely rising over the horizon as I stood in the kitchen, pouring myself a cup of coffee. I stared out the window, my mind already ticking through the steps I needed to take. Every move had to be perfect. Every piece of the puzzle had to fit just right. As Jessica finally came downstairs, her usual smile plastered on her face, I looked at her and felt a strange sense of detachment. She was already gone, even if she didn't know it yet. "Morning," she said, kissing me on the cheek. "Morning," I replied, my voice calm, controlled. I wasn't waiting up anymore. I was preparing for the end. The next morning, as the house remained eerily silent, I sat in my office staring at the computer screen, the cursor blinking in a blank document. I had spent the night going over everything in my head, every detail, every lie, every betrayal. The anger, the sense of violation, it was all still there, simmering just below the surface. But now it was more focused, sharpened. I had a plan, and this time it wasn't just about catching her in the act. It was about destroying her life, both of their lives, piece by piece. First, the money. Jessica wasn't stupid, but she was careless. She'd always let me handle the finances, trusted me with the bills, the investments, the savings. And that was her first mistake. Over the last few months, I'd quietly funneled small amounts out of our joint accounts. Nothing big enough to raise suspicion, just enough to shift the balance in my favor. Today, though, I would move more. Everything, in fact. All of it into an account under my name, offshore, untouchable. As the transfer completed, I felt the first real pang of satisfaction. I imagined her shock when she discovered the sudden emptiness in the accounts, her confusion as she tried to figure out where it all went. But that was just the beginning. I closed the banking app and leaned back in my chair. Jessica's world revolved around appearances. Our friends, her social circle, the image she'd carefully constructed of us as the perfect couple. To the outside world, she was the loving wife, the doting partner. No one knew the truth. No one had any idea that beneath the polished surface, everything was rotting. I intended to burn her carefully curated life to the ground. Step 2, social media. I logged into Jessica's accounts, her Instagram, her Facebook, even her Twitter. She hadn't bothered changing the passwords, not since the last time we'd updated them together. A rookie mistake. I could have deleted everything, but that would have been too easy, too merciful. Instead, I deactivated her accounts one by one. No more photos of her glamorous dinners, no more gushing captions about date nights with the husband she was betraying. I imagined her panic when she realized her virtual world had gone dark, that she could no longer post updates about her life, that she'd been effectively silenced. She would start to unravel piece by piece, just like I had. I wasn't done yet. I opened her text messages with Brian. Scrolling through the sickeningly intimate conversations, I copied them into a new document. Every message, every salacious detail, every promise of love and lust exchanged between them, it was all there, laid out in black and white. I printed a hard copy and saved a digital version on a USB drive. Evidence, I told myself. I would need evidence. Not for me, for Sarah. Sarah, Brian's wife. I remembered her vaguely from a few years back. Quiet, shy, the type of woman who faded into the background at parties, overshadowed by the loud, boisterous personalities of her husband and Jessica. The thought of her unknowingly living a lie, the same way I had been, sparked something inside me. She deserved to know. She deserved to see every single vile thing her husband had written to mine. That would come soon. But not yet. First, I needed to get deeper into Brian's life. I needed to know exactly what I was dealing with. And so that afternoon, I started digging. Brian wasn't hard to find online. His business was plastered all over LinkedIn and various social media platforms. He ran a small tech consulting firm, a competitor to mine, though he'd never been much of a threat. Brian had always been more about charm than actual skills, more focused on the appearance of success than the reality of it. But as I dug deeper into his business dealings, I started to uncover some interesting details. Payments that didn't add up, clients whose invoices were suspiciously inflated, funds that seemed to vanish into thin air. Fraud. He wasn't just incompetent, he was a criminal. And that gave me more ammunition than I ever expected to have. This wasn't just about revenge anymore, it was about justice. Brian had been skimming money from his clients, inflating project costs, and pocketing the difference. I could expose him, ruin his reputation, bankrupt his company. And by doing so, I would ruin Jessica too. Their lives were intertwined now, and if he fell, she would go down with him. I made copies of everything, his bank transactions, his client invoices, the evidence of his fraudulent activity. I saved them all on the same USB drive as Jessica's texts. Tomorrow, I would send it to Sarah. I could already picture the shock on her face, the devastation as she realized her entire marriage was a lie, just like mine. That night, I lay in bed beside Jessica, her soft breathing the only sound in the dark room. She was asleep, unaware of the storm that was about to hit her life. I stared at the ceiling, my mind racing with thoughts of what would come next. The pieces were all in place. All I had to do was pull the trigger. But something nagged at me, a faint whisper of doubt that I hadn't expected. Was this too much? Was I really prepared to destroy not just Jessica, but Brian, Sarah, and who knows how many others in the process? I'd always been a calculated man, logical, rational. But now I was teetering on the edge of something darker, something I wasn't sure I could come back from. I glanced over at Jessica, her face peaceful, innocent, as if she hadn't been living a double life for months. The anger flared again, chasing away the doubt. No, this wasn't too much. This was justice. She'd made her choice, and now she would pay the price. The next day, I mailed the USB drive to Sarah. No note, no explanation, just the evidence she needed to see. I knew it wouldn't take her long to put the pieces together, and when she did, the fallout would be spectacular. By the evening, Jessica still hadn't noticed the missing money, the deactivated social media accounts, but I knew it was only a matter of time before her world started to crumble. That night, I lay awake, waiting. At around midnight, Jessica's phone buzzed on the nightstand. A text. I didn't even have to check it to know who it was from. Brian, of course. I reached for the phone, my fingers hovering over the screen for a moment before I unlocked it with ease. Sure enough, there it was. Brian. Miss you already. Can't wait until tomorrow. I stared at the message, feeling the rage rise again, threatening to boil over. But I kept it in check. I couldn't afford to lose control now. I needed to stay focused, stay calm. I put the phone back on the nightstand and lay back down, the wheels in my mind spinning. Tomorrow would be the beginning of the end. The next morning, Jessica was restless. I could see it in the way her eyes darted to her phone every few minutes, her fingers drumming impatiently on the kitchen counter as she sipped her coffee. She'd noticed the social media blackout. No more Instagram likes or comments flooding in. No more validation from the carefully constructed online persona she'd nurtured over the years. But she hadn't said anything yet. Maybe she thought it was a glitch, some tech issue. She had no idea I was behind it. By midday, I received a text from Sarah. Sarah, can we meet? She didn't need to say more. I knew she had seen the messages. The USB drive had done its job, delivering a sucker punch of reality straight into her inbox. Me, sure, where? We arranged to meet at a small cafe downtown. A quiet, out-of-the-way spot where no one would recognize us. When I arrived, she was already seated, staring blankly into a cup of tea. Her face was pale, eyes red and puffy. She had been crying. Of course she had. Matt, she said softly when I sat down. Her voice was raw, fragile. Sarah. We sat in silence for a few moments, the weight of what we both knew hanging between us like a dark cloud. Finally, she broke the silence. How long have you known? Her voice cracked at the edges. About a week, I admitted. Maybe longer if I count the suspicions. She nodded, biting her lip. Her hands shook slightly as she reached into her bag, pulling out the USB drive. I saw everything. The texts, the photos. God, I can't believe I didn't see it sooner. I leaned back, watching her closely. This was part of the plan, part of what needed to happen. But seeing her pain didn't bring me the satisfaction I thought it would. It just felt hollow, like the emptiness I'd been carrying for days was growing larger, swallowing me from the inside out. You deserve to know, I said. I thought you should see the truth before it all blows up. She looked up at me, her eyes filled with something between gratitude and heartbreak. Thank you. I don't know what I'm going to do, but at least I know. You're not alone, I said quietly. We're both in this, and there's more. About Brian's business. Her brow furrowed. What do you mean? I pulled out a second USB drive, the one with the financial documents, the fraudulent invoices, the trail of money Brian had siphoned off from his clients. He's been embezzling, skimming off the top, inflating costs, and pocketing the difference. If this gets out, his business will be destroyed, and he'll probably go to prison. Sarah stared at the drive, her face a mix of shock and disbelief. You're serious? I nodded. Dead serious. You can take this to the authorities or we can do it together. It's your call, but either way, he's going down. She didn't respond right away. She just stared at the drive, her mind clearly spinning as she processed the weight of what I was offering. After a long silence, she nodded. Together, she whispered. We'll do it together. When I returned home that evening, Jessica was pacing the living room, her face flushed with irritation. Her phone was clutched tightly in her hand, and the moment she saw me, she pounced. Matt, what the hell is going on with the accounts? I can't access any of our money. I kept my expression neutral, pretending to be surprised. What do you mean? Our savings, Matt, it's all gone. The accounts are empty. Her voice was shrill, panic laced through every word. I feigned confusion. That's impossible. I'll check it out. She stared at me, her eyes narrowing as if she didn't quite believe me. But she didn't have any proof, not yet. I walked over to my laptop, pulling it open and pretending to log into the bank. Of course, I already knew what she'd find. Nothing. Just a few dollars left to keep the account open. Everything else transferred to the offshore account I'd set up. Looks like it's all still there, I said, tilting the screen toward her. Maybe you just logged in wrong. Jessica's eyes flashed with anger, but she was still trying to keep it together. Don't gaslight me, Matt. I'm not stupid. I know what I saw. Maybe you should call the bank, I said calmly, shrugging. See if there's a glitch on their end. She stormed off, muttering under her breath as she dialed the bank's customer service line. I watched her go, feeling the edges of a smile creep up my face. She was starting to unravel, just like I'd planned. The next day, everything started to collapse. Brian's fraudulent dealings were reported to the authorities. Sarah and I had anonymously sent the documents to the IRS and local law enforcement. It didn't take long for them to respond. Fraud on that scale doesn't go unnoticed for long. By the afternoon, Brian's office had been raided, and the news was already spreading through our social circle. His world was crumbling, just as I'd promised Sarah it would. Jessica, however, was still in the dark about the storm heading her way, but she wouldn't be for long. The wedding was set to be a grand event. One of our closest friends, James, was marrying his longtime girlfriend, and the guest list was filled with everyone Jessica and I had known for years. It was the perfect setting for the final act. I arrived early, wearing my best suit, keeping my demeanor casual, calm. Jessica followed not long after, still rattled by the missing money and the social media blackout, but trying to keep up appearances. She was good at that, smiling for the crowd while her life crumbled behind closed doors. And then there was Brian. He arrived with a smug expression plastered across his face, his arm casually draped around Sarah, who looked like she was on the verge of tears. He didn't know, not yet. He still thought he'd gotten away with everything. As the reception got underway, I kept my distance, watching from across the room as Brian and Jessica exchanged furtive glances. They thought they were so clever, so discreet. Little did they know their world was about to implode. Brian sauntered over to me eventually, a smug grin on his face. "Matt," he said, raising his glass. "How's it going?" I didn't respond right away, just stared at him for a moment, letting the silence stretch. Then I smiled. "Funny," I said. "Your sister said the same thing to me." His grin faltered, confusion flashing across his face. "What?" Before he could process it, the doors to the reception hall burst open, and two uniformed officers strode in, heading straight for Brian. The room went silent, everyone's eyes darting between Brian and the police, confusion and shock rippling through the crowd. "Brian Turner?" one of the officers asked. "You're under arrest for fraud and embezzlement. You have the right to remain silent." The color drained from Brian's face. He turned to me, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. No words coming out. I smiled again, a slow, deliberate grin. "I guess you didn't see that coming, did you?" The officers slapped handcuffs on him as the room erupted into a frenzy of whispers and gasps. Brian struggled, but it was no use. He was led out of the reception in front of everyone, his colleagues, his friends, and most importantly, Jessica. Her face had gone pale, her eyes wide with disbelief. She turned to me, her voice shaking. "Matt, what's happening?" "Everything's falling apart, Jess," I said softly, taking a step closer. "Everything you built with lies, it's all crashing down." Before she could respond, Sarah appeared at her side, her eyes burning with fury. "He told me everything, Jessica," Sarah spat. "You and Brian, all of it." Jessica's mouth hung open, her face crumpling as Sarah's words hit her like a sledgehammer. "No, Sarah, please, you have to understand." "I understand perfectly," Sarah said coldly. "You ruined everything." I didn't need to watch what happened next. Jessica was crumbling, her world unraveling just like Brian's. I'd done what I set out to do. I didn't stick around for the aftermath, for the tears, the yelling, the recriminations. I didn't need to. I turned and walked out of the reception hall, my footsteps echoing behind me. The satisfaction I had imagined, the sense of victory was there, but so was something else, a hollowness, an emptiness that I hadn't anticipated. I had won, but what had I really gained? As I drove home, I wondered if revenge had been worth the punto, the destruction, the chaos, the pain I'd caused. It had all been justified, hadn't it? They had betrayed me. But now, as the adrenaline wore off, all I was left with was the echo of their shattered lives and a question that gnawed at me. What now? I drove home in silence, the weight of my victory settling in the passenger seat beside me. I should have felt more, relief, joy, something, but all I felt was the low hum of emptiness. The satisfaction of seeing Brian cuffed, Jessica standing stunned, Sarah finally getting her moment of justice. It had come and gone. Now there was just silence, the quiet after the storm. But I wasn't done. Not yet. The wedding was over, but the fallout had only just begun. As I parked in front of the house, the same house Jessica and I had once shared so many plans for, I knew this was the last piece of the puzzle, the final confrontation. She wouldn't just crumble. I would make sure she was buried under the weight of everything she had done. Inside, Jessica was waiting for me. I could tell by the way the lights were still on, the heavy stillness hanging in the air like an accusation. She was sitting on the edge of the couch, staring at her phone, as if it held some answer to a question she hadn't even figured out how to ask yet. Her eyes flicked to mine as soon as I walked in. There was a flicker of desperation, a glimmer of hope that somehow I'd come here to explain it all away, to tell her this wasn't her fault, that it was all a big misunderstanding. But I wasn't here for reconciliation. "Matt," she started, her voice shaky, "what's happening? Brian's been arrested. The police." I cut her off with a single look. The words died in her throat. "You still don't get it, do you?" I said, my voice cold, steady. This wasn't just about Brian. This was never just about him. This was about you. Her brow furrowed, confusion warring with panic. "Me? What do you mean? Matt, I don't—" I stepped closer, towering over her as she shrank back on the couch. "You lied, Jess. You cheated. You betrayed me. And now you're paying the price." The color drained from her face. She opened her mouth to speak, but nothing came out. She was caught, trapped in her own web, and the realization was finally starting to sink in. Her perfect world, the life she had built on lies and manipulation, was collapsing around her. "You think I didn't know?" I asked, leaning in, my voice a low growl. "I've known for weeks. I saw the texts. I watched you sneak around with Brian, laughing behind my back. Did you really think I wouldn't find out?" Tears welled in her eyes. She shook her head, her voice barely a whisper. I didn't mean for it to happen, Matt. It just— Don't." My voice was sharp, cutting through her pathetic excuses. "Don't even try to justify it. You made your choice. You picked him over me, and now you're going to live with the consequences." She sobbed, burying her face in her hands. "Please, Matt, I'm sorry. I made a mistake. I didn't know how to—" I cut her off again, my tone hard, unforgiving. "You didn't make a mistake. You made a decision. You knew exactly what you were doing. And now you're going to lose everything because of it." I let the words sink in, watching as her tears turned into gasps for breath. She was unraveling, just as I had planned. But I wasn't here for her apologies. I wasn't here for her tears. "You want to know what's happening?" I asked, taking a step back. "I've drained our accounts. Everything you relied on, gone. The money, the status, the life you love so much. It's all disappearing, Jess. And your social media? Gone. No more posts about your perfect life. No more pretending." She blinked up at me, her mouth trembling as she struggled to form a coherent thought. What do you mean?" "I mean it's over," I said, my voice cold and final. "Your life as you knew it is over. Brian's gone. His business is ruined. And you? You'll be lucky if anyone still talks to you after this. Her sobs intensified, but I didn't flinch. I wasn't here for her forgiveness or her guilt. I was here for the final blow. You thought you could just move on, didn't you? You thought you could have him and keep your life with me. Well, guess what, Jess? You don't get to have both. I turned to walk away, but her voice, weak, broken, stopped me in my tracks. Matt, please, I love you. I'll fix it. We can fix this. I paused, my hand on the doorknob, and for a split second, the weight of it all hit me. The years we had spent together, the moments of happiness that felt so far away now. But then the image of those texts flashed in my mind, her words to Brian, her promises to him, and the cold, calculated resolve that had carried me this far returned. I turned to face her one last time. No, Jess. You can't fix this. You broke it, and now you're on your own. With that, I walked out, leaving her sobbing on the couch, the sound of her shattered world echoing in my ears. As I drove away from the house, my mind was a whirlwind of emotions. The satisfaction of revenge, the cold triumph of watching Jessica's life crumble before her. It was all there, but it felt distant, detached, like I was watching it from somewhere far away. I had won. I had destroyed everything she and Brian had built. But as I drove through the quiet streets, the adrenaline began to fade, leaving behind an unsettling emptiness. What now? I pulled over to the side of the road, staring out at the dark, empty stretch of highway ahead of me. The city lights flickered in the distance, a world that felt so far removed from everything I had just done. I had spent weeks, months even, planning, calculating, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. And now, with it all behind me, I wasn't sure what was left. I had gotten the last laugh. I had taken everything from them. But had it been worth it? I reached for my phone, scrolling through the messages, the photos, the evidence of Jessica's betrayal. They had felt like a knife in my gut when I first found them. But now they felt like nothing more than old wounds, scars that would never fully heal. A notification popped up, a text from Sarah. Sarah, thank you for everything. I don't know what comes next, but I feel free. Free. I stared at the word for a long time, my mind replaying everything that had happened, the chaos I had unleashed. In a way, I had freed myself too, from the lies, the betrayal, the toxic web Jessica had spun around me. But in doing so, I had become something I didn't recognize. I had become cold, calculating, ruthless. I had orchestrated the downfall of two people, ripped apart their lives piece by piece, and now all I was left with was silence. I replied to Sarah's text with a simple, "You're welcome," then turned off my phone and leaned back in the seat, staring up at the dark sky. The stars seemed so distant, so far out of reach. Maybe that's what revenge did. It distanced you from everything, everyone, even yourself. With a deep breath, I started the car again, pulling back onto the road. I wasn't sure where I was going, but it didn't matter. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't tied to anyone. Not to Jessica, not to the life we had built, not to the anger and bitterness that had fueled me for so long. I was free. As the city lights faded behind me, I drove into the unknown, leaving everything, Jessica, Brian, the revenge, behind me. The road ahead was uncertain, but for the first time in a long time, I felt a flicker of something I hadn't felt in months. Hope. It wasn't much, just a flicker. But it was enough to keep me moving forward. The days after the wedding unfolded in a strange, quiet blur. I expected the victory to taste sweeter, for the satisfaction of revenge to last longer. But as the hours passed, the emptiness remained, gnawing at me like a slow burn I couldn't shake. I avoided Jessica entirely. We didn't exchange a single word. After that night, I left her sobbing in the living room, her perfect world shattered beyond repair. She tried calling me once, twice, then gave up. I knew she'd move out soon. She had no choice. Her accounts were drained, her social network had gone dark, and with Brian facing criminal charges, she was as good as exiled. There was nothing left for her here, no one to turn to. Meanwhile, I kept moving forward, determined to sever the last few ties to my old life. The house we had lived in, the one where I had planned our future, convinced myself we were happy, felt like a relic from another life. I sold it within a week, packed up whatever I cared to keep, which turned out to be less than I thought, and put the rest in storage. Strangely, I didn't feel much attachment to the things we'd accumulated over the years. Most of it just reminded me of her, of the life I now knew had been nothing but a facade. My friends were next. The mutual friends, the couples we used to go on double dates with, the ones who had invited us to their backyard barbecues and wine nights. They'd already heard about what happened at the wedding. Everyone had. News like that travels fast. And just as fast, they'd started pulling back, distancing themselves from the wreckage, unsure where their allegiances lay. I didn't wait for them to choose sides. Instead, I cut them all off. Deleted their numbers from my phone, unfollowed them on social media, and removed myself from the last threads that tied me to that toxic circle. It was strange, after everything I'd been through, how liberating that small act felt. Like purging my life of all the remaining shadows one by one. But that left me with something I hadn't anticipated. Space, a void, really. I had spent so long consumed by anger, driven by revenge, that now, with nothing left to fuel me, I didn't know what to do. I didn't even know who I was anymore without that hate driving me forward. I found myself thinking about Sarah a lot in those days. I hadn't seen or spoken to her since the wedding, but she'd crossed my mind more than once. She had thanked me, told me she felt free, but I wondered how she was really doing. After all, I hadn't been the only one caught in the web of betrayal. One evening, I scrolled through my phone, Sarah's last message still lingering at the top of my texts. I hovered over it, thinking about reaching out, but something stopped me. Maybe it was because I didn't know what I'd say to her, didn't know if I had the right words to offer after everything we'd gone through together. Or maybe it was because I knew she had her own path to walk now, just like I did. I put my phone down and leaned back on the couch, staring at the ceiling. It felt like I had been waiting for something, an epiphany, maybe, or some grand realization. But life didn't work like that, did it? There were no clean endings, no neat resolutions tied up with a bow. There was just moving forward. That's what I had to do now. Move forward. 2 weeks after the wedding, I found myself standing outside a real estate office in a different part of town. Far from the suburbs, far from the life I had once thought I'd live forever. The place was quiet, tucked away from the main road, the kind of neighborhood where no one asked too many questions. I had decided on a new apartment, something modest, simple. A one-bedroom in a building that wasn't flashy but felt solid, reliable. It was all I needed, a place to start over. The realtor handed me the keys with a smile, congratulating me on my new chapter. "Fresh start, huh?" she said, her voice light, cheerful. I nodded, pocketing the keys. "Yeah, something like that." As I walked up the steps to my new apartment, the weight I'd been carrying for weeks began to lift, if only just a little. The place was bare, the walls still freshly painted white, the floors scuffed but clean. It wasn't much, but it was mine alone. I stood in the middle of the living room, taking it all in. The silence felt different here, less oppressive, more open, like a blank canvas waiting to be filled. I realized for the first time in a long while I wasn't looking backward anymore. I wasn't replaying old conversations, reliving betrayals. The anger had quieted. I hadn't expected that, but it was there, this subtle shift inside me. The revenge had come and gone, and I had paid the price for it. The coldness, the calculation, it had stripped something from me, left me hardened in a way I hadn't anticipated. But here, in this quiet room, I started to believe I could leave some of that behind too. I didn't need to be that person anymore. A few days later, I took a drive out of the city. The road was long and winding, the landscape changing from the concrete sprawl to rolling hills and open fields. I didn't know exactly where I was headed, but I liked the uncertainty. It was a break from the meticulous planning that had consumed me for so long. The air felt fresher out here, cleaner. I hadn't realized how much I'd needed that, just to breathe. At one point, I pulled off to the side of the road and stepped out of the car. The wind was cool against my skin, and for the first time in months, I felt calm. No urgency pulling at me, no bitterness lingering in the back of my mind. Just a sense of possibility. I stood there staring out at the horizon, the sky a deep shade of blue with the sun dipping low. And that's when it hit me. Maybe the best revenge wasn't what I'd done to Jessica or Brian. Maybe it wasn't the ruin I'd left in my wake. Maybe the best revenge was this, standing here alive, untethered, looking forward to something new. They no longer had a hold on me. Their betrayal, their lies, it didn't define me anymore. I was free, truly free. It wasn't about rebuilding what I had lost. It wasn't about filling the void. It was about accepting that the void would always be there, but it didn't have to control me. I could choose to step into the unknown. I could choose to let go of the past and walk towards something better, even if I didn't know what that was yet. I climbed back into the car, the engine humming softly as I merged back onto the road. The past was behind me now, receding into the distance with every mile I drove. And ahead of me, I didn't know. But for the first time, I was okay with that. For the first time in a long time, I felt like the future was mine to shape. There was a quiet, steady hope flickering inside me now. It wasn't much, just a flicker, but it was enough. As the miles stretched on, I felt lighter. Not because I had finished something, but because I had finally started something new.